Alright, Mr. Nintendo. We're not gonna be doing much today. Don't want to be here.
Why are you showing me these?
Just tell me how it makes you feel. Bad! Get it away from me! You need to face your fears. You are a sick man. Today, we are going to be talking about your thoughts on emulation. It's illegal. No, it isn't. I do not have a problem. It's the law, and I get to use it. The whole reason you came here to Chaps and Associates was to get help with your problem of abusing copyright law. No, shut up. Why am I here? Yeah, I wouldn't question that. What? Anyways, let's get back on topic. Ugh, I am out of here. Mr. Nintendo, I wouldn't do that. Eat shit. Alright. Got your food for the day right here. For the day? What do I look like to you, a f***ing squirrel? I need more than this! I am holding you hostage in a remote location and could end your life at a moment's notice, and you want to sit there and complain about how much food you're getting? You must be stupid. Yeah, that's what I thought. You know what you're doing to me is extremely illegal. Way more so than any of that emulation crap we were arguing about. Do not say that word around me ever again. That is the whole reason you are here. People like you aren't needed in this world. I'd like to know the whole reason that damn shirt is still wrinkled. You really are stupid, aren't you? You know what? You want to act like that, you can eat nothing for today. Give me that. No, wait. See you tomorrow, dumbass. Damn it.
Over the years, and especially more recently, Nintendo has opted to take part in some business practices that weren't exactly accepted by the general public. The backlash towards the company for their decisions has become even more painfully apparent in the past couple years, as the practices themselves have seemingly become substantially more frequent. The reason that this is the case is up for debate, but everyone has their theories, including myself. For now though, it's best we get a better understanding of all the questionable decisions they've made so far, and why people got so angry about them in the first place. Let's talk about it. Now, when the topic of Nintendo doing quote-unquote bad stuff comes up, I often hear the word anti-consumerism being thrown around quite a bit. So much in fact that I feel the word itself has lost its actual meaning. Anti-consumer, as an adjective, is defined as improperly favoring the interests of businesses over the interests of consumers. In the case of quite a few of the presumably non-respectable things Nintendo has done, this term isn't the most fitting one to use. Of course, it is a much more fitting term to use in some cases compared to others, but even that can be left up to the wonders of subjectivity. However, I personally think that the term consumer neglect is a much better blanket statement that covers more scenarios when it comes to Nintendo's malpractices. Neglect, in some contexts, can be defined as giving little attention or respect to, or to disregard, and I think this is a far more fitting description of what they are doing. Many things, like the complaints from their fans who also happen to be consumers, are disregarded, with little to no explanation as to why, and almost zero transparency to the actual thought process of the company itself. It's no wonder the fans get so angry at Nintendo, because oftentimes it seems like we're voicing our complaints inside of an echo chamber. I'm almost positive they are aware of most of the complaints we have, but choose to ignore them because, well, usually everyone will just buy the product anyway. The question is, can you blame the consumer for this? Not necessarily. It is the company's responsibility to create the best product possible, but the consumers also have the power to voice their complaints with a product by simply not buying it.
This shit sucks! But it has Mario in it.
You know, you're right. You know me too well, you little rascal.
However, this is, in my opinion, an unrealistic request of consumers as a whole. First of all, the consumer base of Nintendo fans is so large, spanning all ages and locations, that it is virtually impossible to influence anywhere close to the majority of them to boycott a product. Not to mention the fact that some fans just don't care about the presumably bad thing that Nintendo is doing. Everyone assigns their own value to a product, and if it seems worth it to them, they'll gladly pay for it. That's the dilemma being faced here. Nintendo does something that people don't like, tons of people buy their products anyway, the cycle continues. If you are a Nintendo fan, it is however almost certain that at least one of these business decisions has either affected you directly or at least caused you to think of Nintendo under a slightly more negative light. I could sit and argue semantics and theorize about the mind of a Nintendo fan all day long, but that obviously won't solve anything, so let's actually talk about these specific scenarios in depth and at least attempt to look at them with an objective and critical eye.
No thanks. I'll just keep writing angry comments on their Twitter and act like it makes a difference. Yep. They're gonna listen to this one.
Inevitably, I've actually already covered a few of the instances of consumer neglect coming from Nintendo before, because the topics were extensive enough to warrant their own full-length discussion. Regardless, for the sake of comprehensiveness, I'm going to briefly discuss them here as well. First off, we have limited releases.
I am tired of saying those words. No, I am not!
As much as this topic has been run into the ground, it's still worth mentioning in the context of this conversation. The abnormal and sudden adoption of the limited release model by Nintendo for a consecutive string of random titles baffled many fans and angered even more. The main terms used by many of these fans when describing the issue with limited releases were usually artificial exclusivity or artificial demand. Limited releases purposefully keep the game on the shelf for a shorter time period than normal, most of the time only officially selling the game for less than a year. In some instances, limited releases can actually be a great idea for all parties involved. For example, let's say there was an indie game for the Switch that was already on the eShop and was doing really well. So well, in fact, that the studio was interested in doing a physical release of the game. However, they do not have enough funding to continuously meet the demand and supply the physical copies for the foreseeable and indefinite future simply because they're still a considerably small studio. So, they decided to do a limited release of their game, only producing copies for a limited window of time to provide physical versions of their game for fans who are interested while avoiding the exacerbation of too much money due to high and persistent production costs. In this scenario, a limited release sounds like a great idea and the best solution possible considering the circumstances. Even further, there are companies who help people with this exact issue get their game out in physical form.
What's that? They did that exact thing with a collection of some of the most popular Mario games of all time? Well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would they took it off the eShop too? Are you hearing this?
Yes, as most people already know, Super Mario 3D All-Stars, a collection of the games Super Mario 64, Sunshine, and Galaxy, was only available both digitally and physically from September 18th, 2020 to March 31st, 2021. This one in particular seems to be the most popular limited release controversy because of the sheer popularity of Mario. A limited release for this game, especially in digital form, was very obviously an attempt to induce buyer's remorse or FOMO. There was no reason to release the game in this fashion other than as an attempt to artificially inflate the revenue for the product within a very short window of time. Which they did, don't get me wrong, but to me it seems scummy to do that, especially with something as popular as Mario. There are plenty of reasons and scenarios a person would not be able to purchase the game within that window even if they wanted to. And even if the issue was that Nintendo didn't want to pay to keep producing cartridges for the game, I am sure that hosting the game on the eShop is not expensive at all, especially for the additional profits that would continue to show after the physical release's end date. A similar but arguably worse scenario happened around the same time with the re-release of the first Fire Emblem game on the Switch for its 30th anniversary. This port came out in December and was only available until March 31st. But for this one, the title was announced exclusively as a digital release, meaning that the game was literally impossible to purchase even secondhand after the deadline had passed. To add salt to the wound, this was the very first time the game has officially been localized in English and sold in the United States. So at this point in time, you cannot play the first Fire Emblem game under official English translation unless you bought it during that initial window.
Alright, looks like I just have one more question for you. Sure. Have you spoken English between December of 2020 and March of 2021? Actually, no, I just learned English this past June. Yeah, you aren't playing this game. But why does that matter? Get out!
Nintendo's reasoning when prompted by the press about these releases stated that the limited release windows were meant to celebrate the respective game's anniversary, and that once the anniversary period they set was over, the celebration was over. At least to me, this reasoning seems like it may even be some sort of corporate PR cover-up for the original speculation I mentioned earlier, and that it really was a scheme to just make as much money as possible. Nintendo's fiscal year also happens to conveniently end on March 31st, meaning they will be reporting all of that sweet limited release revenue to their shareholders the very next day after. If you were to tell me that a games company was celebrating the anniversary of one of its most popular characters for a limited time, I would just think they changed their Twitter profile picture for a week and called it good. Not try to completely wipe availability for a game celebrating the anniversary that would do completely fine outside of the context of it anyway. Just for the record, they did change their Twitter profile picture though. However, surprisingly enough, at least where I live, I actually still see physical copies of 3D All-Stars collecting dust on quite a few store shelves. Nintendo actually states on the official website for the game that this is because the physical release is meant to remain on store shelves while supplies last. It's actually quite surprising how there are still copies of the game left to be sold after this long though. The game sold like mad during its official release window, so the probability of them overshooting the sales estimates by that big of a margin is pretty unlikely in my eyes. Then again, I'm probably reading way too far into it and starting to sound like some crazy conspiracy theorist. Either way, the digital version of the game is and has been unobtainable since the end of March 2021. Another thing that I've already covered in detail is JoyCon Drift. JoyCon Drift is an extremely common problem in Nintendo Switch controllers that causes them to behave abnormally, most commonly sending incorrect inputs to the console, such as moving the analog stick in a direction the player didn't even press, or in some cases even sending an analog stick input to the console that was never entered in the first place, causing things like the player moving without the controller even being touched. The issue was discovered and first made known shortly after the Switch's initial release, and directed a lot of negative attention towards Nintendo for obvious reasons. There was a blatant defect with their product that a considerable amount of people were experiencing, and consumers are still angry about it to this day. Why is that, you ask? Well, as far as people know, Nintendo never fixed the problem. Joy-Cons around the world are still drifting to this day, and it's been over 4 years since the problem first became apparent. Nintendo does happen to offer repairs of the controllers now if you send the Joy-Cons into them, but that means you're basically giving them up for at least 3 weeks, and the fix may not even be permanent. They actually originally charged for these repairs as well, meaning you had to pay money to fix a defect that they were well aware of and essentially refused to fix themselves on the production side. Most people nowadays are just so tired of trying to fix or deal with the annoyances of drift that they aren't even using the Joy-Cons themselves at all anymore.
I'm still using mine to level out my desk.
There have also been multiple private and class action lawsuits filed against Nintendo relating to JoyCon Drift, but unfortunately none of them have brought about any real change. Towards the beginning of the Switch's lifespan, when drift was first becoming apparent, Nintendo did put out a statement urging consumers to visit their support website if they were having any issues with their controllers, essentially acknowledging that drift was a real problem and that they would fix it. However, in their responses to lawsuits, they took a very different approach, and it goes to show how much of a fake corporate face they put on sometimes. In response to one of the class action lawsuits filed against them relating to this issue, they argued that JoyCon Drift, quote, isn't a real problem or hasn't caused anyone any inconvenience. Basically, they were using the deny method, something common in legal practices when a big company does something really f***ing stupid and doesn't want to have to deal with cleaning up after themselves. But let me dial back my frustration for a minute here, because very recently people have begun to notice that some Joy-Cons are coming with a fix for drift right out of the box. The fix simply includes putting 2 thin strips of foam behind the joystick module. This fix was already being used by consumers themselves beforehand, but that obviously involves opening up the controller, which most people aren't comfortable doing. The added foam seems to solve the problem, and others even reported a small piece of cardboard achieving the same result. However, in most cases, this fix is not permanent, especially with Nintendo's solution. Because of how thin the foam strips are, after enough use they can wear down all the way back to the plastic, essentially voiding the Joy-Con of the fix and opening it back up to drift once again. What's even more strange about this is the fact that not every single new set of Joy-Cons being shipped today includes the fix. Some people are reporting the foam strips in their pair of Zelda Skyward Sword HD exclusive Joy-Cons, but others are not. It's honestly very confusing why only some of them are receiving this treatment, and even more baffling is the fact that instead of attempting to prevent Joy-Con drift at a fundamental hardware and manufacturing level, they instead opt for a cheap and easy fix that fans were using well before them.
Alright, let's see what we got for this one.
The final thing I've already discussed before, but not nearly as in-depth as the others, is the Nintendo Switch Online service, also commonly referred to as NSO. I think it's safe to say that the online experience in the vast majority of Nintendo Switch games is, less than ideal. For starters, most real-time online matches in quite a few games are unbearably laggy, way more often than not. I don't know about you, but I personally don't like playing my online games in Microsoft PowerPoint mode.
And on this next slide, the golf ball rolled a little further.
Some games run much better when playing online than others, and I can only guess that has something to do with how each game's online play infrastructure is designed. But even in the most reliable online games like Splatoon 2 or Mario Kart 8, I still receive random spurts of lag and connection errors that kick me out of matches quite often. Most famously, Super Mario Maker 2's online multiplayer modes are extremely laggy, especially at the lower versus ranks. It seems that lag becomes less prominent in the higher ranks of the game, presumably because anyone playing up there has a fairly decent internet connection and pushed through the pools of players with horrible internet to get to the top. That's the exact problem with most of these games though. The network is designed in a way so that if one person has shitty internet, the entire match suffers, making them lag just as much as the person with the dollar store internet connection that they're playing with. Either way, I've even had experiences where I was playing with people who I knew all had a decent connection, but still experienced large amounts of lag just because of how bad the service is in general. As of right now, Nintendo Switch Online is only $20 USD per year, or $3.99 USD a month if you want to pay monthly. Compared to the other online services from competing consoles, this is extremely cheap, more than half the price essentially. It's very possible that this very cheap subscription price is what's holding the company back from improving the network infrastructure. Obviously, a potential solution could be to increase the price of the service in order to pull in more funding for improving online play specifically. However, since they've already settled on the price, especially for this long, increasing it at this point would cause a very obvious amount of controversy. A better solution, in my opinion, would be to offer some sort of premium tier membership for NSO. This tier could cost a few more dollars per month, and the original price would stay the same for the lower tier. The benefit of buying the premium tier would be access to the library of Nintendo 64 and Game Boy Advance games similar to the already existing NES and SNES online libraries. Nintendo could then use the extra revenue gained from the premium memberships, put it back into improving the online play, and both sides benefit. The people who still want to pay for the base membership starting at $3.99 a month will receive better online play, and the people who pay for the premium membership get more legacy content. Speaking of legacy content, let's also talk about the current situation with that on the Switch as well. So far, the only legacy games available on the Switch are the titles offered through the NES and SNES online service, and a small number of ports such as Super Mario 3D All-Stars and other games ported by second or third-party developers. The Virtual Console, which was present on the past 2 entire generations of Nintendo consoles, both portable and home, is nowhere to be found. The library of games on Virtual Console across all of these systems totaled over 600 titles by the end of all of their lifetimes, with over half of that being available on the Wii U alone. All of that legacy content is essentially flushed down the drain since we've moved on to the next generation. More than 90% of those games are no longer playable on the Switch, not to mention the fact that the library we do have now on NSO was drip-fed to us at a snail's pace over the past 4 years. The reason I'm mentioning this again has nothing to do with emulation like I discussed before. It's the fact that so many people are willing to pay for content that is extremely cheap, easy, and profitable to put out on the Switch, but even after over 4 years it still hasn't happened. It's nice to have this many NES and SNES titles available to us for only $20 a year, but it feels like nothing in comparison to what the past consoles did. Even if they did charge for some of the legacy content instead of just including it in NSO, I'm sure most people would gladly pay. It's honestly hard to say this is a huge deal, but I know a very large amount of people that would really appreciate more legacy content on the Switch. And obviously, the issue of game preservation is always something to worry about. Good evening and welcome to Channel 12.5 News. I'm your host, Hank R. Mann. Let's get right into tonight's stories.
There's only one camera!
Oh. Right. It has now been 2 weeks since the disappearance of local acclaimed therapist Dr. Edward Chaps. Authorities allege Chaps may have been kidnapped from within his own office and taken to a remote location. He was last seen by his receptionist beginning a weekly appointment with one of his patients, who has yet to be publicly identified as to protect their privacy. The search for Dr. Chaps, or his corpse, continues as we speak, and police urge that anyone with any information that may lead to his whereabouts contact the number on your screen now. Oh, this just in, we've received word that our field team has managed to gain press access to the crime scene. Not sure how they managed that, but let's take it over to Darcy for more information. F***ing hate this job, man. Thanks, Hank. I'm here on the scene of Dr. Chaps' alleged kidnapping, where police are diligently inspecting all that can be inspected. Oh, that looks like one of the lead detectives right over there. Let's go see what he has to say. Excuse me, sir.
How the hell did you get in here?
Darcy James, Channel 12.5 News. The viewers just have one question. How do you know that Dr. Chaps was kidnapped?
Well, we noticed his chair fell over.
Let's get a panning shot of that. Anything else?
No.
The final problem that is apparent with Switch Online, and probably the smallest, is the lack of social functionality on the console. Features such as player-to-player messaging, inviting friends to games and many titles, as well as things like player parties and game-specific communities or messaging boards are all missing from the service. But because the main target audience of the Switch skewing younger than other consoles, I don't see that much of a problem with this, and I think Nintendo wants to prevent any cases of targeted harassment or bullying on their platform for this exact reason. Especially after the absolute meme fest that was Miiverse. Don't get me wrong, I loved it and I'm all for a social network for the Switch, but the reasons I gave are probably why they haven't done anything like that ever since. Either way, an easy solution to that would be as simple as having a parental control option that prevents online social interaction on the device when enabled. The severity of each quote-unquote offense that Nintendo has been involved with varies widely, and I'm sure that was obvious, but let's start off with the one that I think is the least bad out of all of them. Throughout the years, many plastic figurines featuring a number of famous video game characters known as Amiibo have been released by Nintendo. Most commonly used simply as collectibles, each Amiibo also has its own functionality when tapped in via an NFC connection in select games. For example, you can scan most of your Amiibo in Breath of the Wild to receive some useful items, and for some specific Amiibo you can actually get exclusive armor sets and weapons. However, quite a few of these amiibo have functionality inside games that many people think may be pushing the boundaries of fun little extras a bit too far. First off, I want to mention a category of amiibo I like to call quality of life gates. These select few figures are your key to a literal quality of life feature within a game, and also will save you a ton of time on unnecessary waiting and backtracking. Let's take an extra side mode of the Switch port of Super Mario 3D World, Bowser's Fury, for example. In this small adventure, Bowser has grown to a massive size and also sports a new, more threatening look. Around every 5 minutes during gameplay in this mode, he will awaken and wreak havoc across the entire map trying to take out Mario. Only during this time are some of the game's main collectibles, cat shines, available for the player to collect, as Bowser has to destroy a special kind of block known as Fury blocks in order to reveal the collectible hidden behind them. You're probably beginning to see the problem here. If the player's only remaining cat shine to collect for a certain area is the Fury block one, then they are quite literally stuck standing around until Fury Bowser reappears. Up to 5 whole minutes, as I said. But all of this is easily solved if you happen to have any Bowser amiibo on you. Scan any one of these at any time and Fury Bowser will appear instantly. You get to entirely skip the tedium of waiting around for him to appear just because you paid extra money for a glorified piece of plastic with the same technology used to contactless pay with your credit card.
Oh, hold up there, bud. You got your amiibo? No. Go ahead and stand over there for me.
What the? I have money.
No talking. Your 5 minutes starts now.
Possibly an even more controversial example of a quality of life gate amiibo is the Zelda and Loftwing amiibo, released at the same time as Skyward Sword HD. For context, in the original version of Skyward Sword on the Wii, the only way to return to the sky once you reached the surface was to find an orange bird statue and get sent up from there. However, an amiibo functionality with the Zelda and Loftwing amiibo has been added in the HD version that allows you to return to the sky at any time, no matter where you are, even inside of a dungeon. There are many reasons that a player may want to return to the sky while playing, such as upgrading their gear, opening goddess chests, or turning in a side quest for the reward, and this amiibo cuts down on the backtracking needed to get back up there significantly, especially inside of dungeons since you'd have to go outside the dungeon in order to even find a bird statue that will actually send you back up to the sky. Even further, once you've teleported up into the sky, you can scan the amiibo a second time and return back to the exact same spot you originally came from. I should also mention that the Zelda and Loftwing amiibo in specific costs nearly $10 more than the large majority of other amiibo. Essentially, Nintendo locked fast travel, a feature that would have been great in the original game but makes even more sense now with the remake, behind an extra purchase totaling nearly half the game's value. I personally would have been much less apprehensive against this amiibo's functionality if it wasn't able to be used inside of dungeons. Outside of dungeons, a bird statue to return to the sky usually isn't that far away, but the fact that this amiibo, and this amiibo only, will allow the player to circumvent a large majority of the game's annoying and tedious backtracking just seems a bit scummy to me. And to rub salt into the Skyward Sword HD wound, when Twilight Princess HD launched on the Wii U back in 2016, it also launched at the standard price of $59.99 USD, and also included amiibo functionality that unlocked an entire extra dungeon within the game centered around Wolflink. But don't get angry about this one just yet. Included in the $59.99 price tag was the exact amiibo you needed to access the extra dungeon. And if you didn't care about getting access to this content, you could just buy the game by itself for $10 less. Say what you will about the true dollar value of HD remasters, because I don't even want to begin to try to take on that argument objectively, but I really feel like Twilight Princess HD's route of implementing extra features via amiibo functionality is a much better way of going about things in terms of the consumer's best interest. A number of other amiibo offer up assistance to struggling players through power-ups, health restores, etc., and this is probably the most common use of the figures themselves. As a concept, I think that this is fine and frankly a pretty good use of amiibo, but in some cases I believe the assistance goes a little too far to justify only being part of the amiibo. Let me explain. One of the collectibles in Super Mario Odyssey is the purple coins, officially known as regional coins. There are a certain number of them in each kingdom scattered around for the player to find, and can be used to purchase specific outfits that are required to obtain certain moons, as well as decorations for the Odyssey. In the base game, there is no way to find these coins other than to simply scour the kingdom and locate them yourself. If you get stuck, there is no way to receive any hints as to their location if you obviously are not getting the locations from an external source. Throughout the entire game, this is always the case, unless you happen to have any of the Bowser Amiibo. Just scan one of those and you'll immediately be given the location of a set of regional coins in the form of a big purple glowing circle. This is just yet another amiibo that saves you from the tedium if you don't feel like doing something, and I could sit here and give even more examples of extra content and features being locked behind amiibo, but I'm sure you get the point. With this specific example of Mario Odyssey, since we're luckily in the age of the internet, this obviously isn't that big of a deal since you could just look up the locations online. But some people don't like receiving outside help in games and prefer to complete them themselves. Plus, you could even consider having to search up the regional coin locations as a form of tedium as well. To me at least, it's just not fun and wastes time that didn't need to be wasted. After all, games are supposed to be fun all the time, right? Do you remember the Wii U? Me neither, but it exists and it was actually a pretty good console with some really good games. So good in fact that a large majority of them got ported over to the Switch. Jokes aside, the Wii U's relative commercial failure consequently caused many games to sell significantly less copies than if they were released on a more popular console. In turn, Nintendo thought many of these games were worth showing to new audiences and got ported over to the Switch with a few extra features. Games like New Super Mario Bros. U, Mario Kart 8, which is actually the best-selling game on the Switch by a long shot, Hyrule Warriors, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, Super Mario 3D World, Pikmin 3, and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze were all put on the Switch and saw much better success with their ports over their original releases. In the case of Tropical Freeze and Pikmin 3 though, Nintendo did something that literally could be considered as anti-consumer. After these games were released on the Switch, their original listings on the Wii U eShop were removed from the storefront entirely, meaning you couldn't buy the game anymore, well, at least not on the Wii U. It was obvious that these games were delisted in order to drive sales for the Switch ports. These ports were both sold at a $60 price tag, while both of the listings on the Wii U eShop sold only for $20. It almost seems like they were actually scared that people would go buy the cheaper version of the games instead, which is especially odd in the case of Pikmin because that game included an entirely new extra side campaign in its port. Tropical Freeze at least makes a little bit of sense since that port only included an extra mode that made the game significantly easier. However, that doesn't make either of the instances acceptable in my opinion. If people want to buy the games on the Wii U, a console that isn't even being supported by Nintendo anymore, then they should be able to do so. Besides, in buying the Switch port, they are also paying for the fact that it is on a current generation console and that it will be portable, on top of the extra features in the ports themselves. I am not necessarily saying these games were worth $60, I am only saying it makes sense that they would be more than their Wii U counterparts because in terms of being on the Switch, they aren't old games yet. Luckily, Pikmin 3 was relisted on the eShop after mass amounts of backlash from fans, but unfortunately Tropical Freeze is still nowhere to be found digitally other than the Switch nowadays. Thanks, Hank. I'm here on the scene of Dr. Chaff's alleged kidnapping, where police are diligently inspecting all that can be inspected. Oh, that looks like one of the...
What is so funny out there?
Check it out. We're on the news!
Yeah, I heard, and why are you happy about that?
Have you seen this Hank guy? He looks so stupid.
Why is that what you're focused on when they literally mention you as a suspect in the investigation?
Yeah, I'm not worried. There is no way in hell they're finding you.
How can you be so sure?
Don't get snarky with me or you'll lose your food tomorrow too.
Oh no, not my singular saltine cracker.
I could starve you to death and you still want to be a smartass.
But you won't.
Oh yeah? And what makes you say that?
If you really wanted me dead, you would have killed me already. There's some other reason I'm here. You're just not telling me.
Nope, no other reason. I just really don't like you and I enjoy seeing you hopelessly stuck in a shed. Now, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go not iron my shirt.
I've made it clear time and time again that Nintendo is very protective of every last one of their intellectual properties, and the lengths they've gone to in order to keep a firm grasp on them have been slightly unnecessary to say the least. What I want to talk about this time though is their stance on the uploading of music tracks from any of their games to the internet. The internet as a whole has a sort of universal love for Nintendo music, and for good reason. They've created some of the most iconic tracks in video game history. Consequently, plenty of people have uploaded these tracks to YouTube for everyone to enjoy, with some channels even being entirely dedicated to creating themed compilations of songs from all of these great games. However, as you may have guessed, Nintendo does not like this. Every few months or so, we see a mass takedown of plenty of Nintendo tracks and compilations off of YouTube due to, obviously, copyright infringement. I'd first off like to acknowledge that, yes, Nintendo is technically within their legal right to do this. I am entirely aware of that, but here's the thing. All of these creators that are uploading these tracks are also fully aware that they don't own the copyright to any of them, so they intentionally and deliberately make sure that they are not receiving any monetary gain directly from the videos themselves. None of the videos have advertisements, the creators do not have paid memberships enabled, nothing. The only thing that a few of the creators have are either a Patreon or a Ko-fi link, asking for your support in the organization of the compilations of music themselves, not in the uploading of copyrighted material. Keep in mind that most of them also don't exclusively upload Nintendo compilations either, and most other games companies allow creators to use and upload their music with monetization. Even worse is the fact that Nintendo has failed to make a very large portion of their music available for streaming or purchase anywhere legally themselves, yet they still get angry and take down anyone who decides to do exactly what they are failing to do. Like I said, not all of Nintendo's music is completely inaccessible legally, but putting all of their tracks on streaming platforms like Spotify or Apple Music, as well as uploading them to YouTube could 1. Make them tons of money, and 2. Keep most people from uploading the tracks themselves, since that's such a huge problem to them apparently. This is one of the few things that Nintendo has done that I genuinely cannot even begin to rationalize. If you are offering the product or service yourself, people are going to figure out a way to obtain it through other means. It does not mean that they want to break the law and commit numerous instances of copyright infringement. They just enjoy what you make and want a way to experience it. This seems to be a common theme with Nintendo when it comes to copyright law and intellectual properties. All of the quote-unquote problems that they have with people obtaining their copyrighted material through alternative means could easily be solved by simply offering the products themselves. Not to mention make them a lot of money, like I already said. Since they are a business, it's also important to look at things from a business perspective.
If we take a look at our sales projections here, it looks like if we put our soundtracks on streaming services, the amount of money we make will go up. Alright. This guy is making 0 f***ing sense to me.
But that's not the only time Nintendo has gotten irrationally angry at fans for doing something seemingly harmless to both the intellectual property and brand as a whole. Welcome to the world of competitive Nintendo games, mostly consisting of Super Smash Bros., but some other games are in the mix too. The relationship with Nintendo and the competitive scene has been rocky to say the least. They've even gone on record stating that none of the Smash games are even intended to be played competitively, essentially indirectly displaying their dismay towards any competitions based around the games they make in general. In turn, a very small amount of competitions have actually been officially sponsored by Nintendo, and even the ones that were usually had their fair share of issues as well. To be clear though, if Nintendo doesn't want to support the competitive scene monetarily, that is completely fine and entirely their choice. However, the least they could do was respect the fact that people do want to play their games competitively. Why does it matter if you didn't intend the game to be played that way? People can play games however the hell they want.
No, no, no! Who does this guy think he is?
Back in November of 2020, an online competition for Super Smash Bros. Melee was planned and going to be hosted by a long-running, well-respected, and community-funded Smash tournament known as the Big House. Due to, well, certain events that were happening at the time, they were not able to hold the competition in person as usual. Instead, they opted to utilize a custom mod for Smash Melee known as Slippy that enabled for online play. This mod was entirely legal to use as long as the player had legally obtained their copy of the game that they were using with the mod, which, to be honest, was most likely the case for every single one of the players involved in the tournament. They are professionals after all. Obviously, anyone who is planning to compete at a high-level tournament for Smash Melee is going to own a copy of Smash Melee. However, in Nintendo's statement to the press after the initial cease and desist was sent to the Big House, they decided to still try and play the card that competitors were using illegally obtained copies of the game. After all of this came to light, it was only a matter of time before the community caught wind and got really angry, and for good reason. This competition was entirely legal as long as the copies of the game were ripped from the players' own copies of the game, which I'm sure the Big House made clear in the rules and regulations. Shortly after the announcement from the Big House about the cease and desist though, the hashtags Free Melee and Save Smash started trending all around the internet, with fans outraged at Nintendo's decision to shut down the tournament. After all, an in-person tournament was essentially impossible at the time, so the least Nintendo could have done was understand that and give the slightest bit of leeway to allow the tournament to commence just that one time, but sadly, it didn't happen. Amidst all this chaos, a Splatoon 2 tournament was planned to be hosted by Nintendo within the coming weeks after the original Big House announcement. In support of the Smash community, many of the top teams competing in the tournament used team names mentioning hashtag Free Melee in some way. Presumably for this exact reason, Nintendo cancelled and banned any and all live streams of the finals event in the tournament, essentially spitting in the face of anyone who chose to stand in solidarity for the unfair treatment of the Smash community. I guess the only phrase I could use toward Nintendo in both the Big House shutdown and Splatoon tournament is out of touch. After all, I can only assume the large majority of the corporate or law sectors of the company are run by some old dudes, most of whom don't have much experience with gaming in the first place, so why should they be trusted with a company expected to make choices in the best interest of their consumers, which all happen to be gamers themselves? It just doesn't make sense. Their views on so many things from copyright law to competitive esports are frankly outdated, and I wish somehow we could get through to them and tell them that they don't have to be like this anymore. Ever since the Switch's release and massive commercial success, I've noticed Nintendo begin to go down a much darker path than they ever have in the past. Why is this? Well, you can blame many things like executive changes, different ideologies, etc, and all of those are contributors as well, but the main reason Nintendo feels they can be a little more scummy nowadays is money. The Nintendo Switch and its games have made Nintendo an unfathomable amount of money over the course of their lifetimes. Much more than the Wii U did, and because they know that most people will throw their money at just about everything they release, and some will even defend the company for their shitty actions that step all over the consumers that love their products so much, it's frankly embarrassing. For the record, I am fully aware that some of the things I've mentioned today are much less of a big deal than others, but does that completely invalidate them as a concern? I don't think so. Say what you will about each specific scenario, but in my opinion, all these decisions are doing is pushing your loyal fans away. I'll leave you with this thought. In order to run a successful company with longevity based primarily on gaming, you have to be a gamer yourself, inside and out. Without that, it's only a matter of time before you screw up too badly and it all comes crumbling down.
Holy shit.